Well, thank you for inviting me this evening. Yes, I'm John Anthony, and I have a business. I do leadership training. I've been doing that for a lot longer time than I like to admit to. Education means a lot to me. I started out in the education field. That's when I went to East Stroudsburg, back when it was called East Stroudsburg State Teachers College, if there's anybody who remembers that far back. And I started in Philadelphia, ended up teaching out in the suburbs out on Long Island. So this is Common Core is a topic that it means a great deal to me. There's only one reason that I'm here tonight and that we're in this room. And that's because if you turn on the news, you're not going to hear any of these points that we're going to discuss. They're simply not there. If the media was doing its job, we could be out doing things we really want to be this evening instead of sitting here listening to this. But they're not doing their job. So what we're going to do is kind of deep dive into this Common Core, see where it comes from. I'm going to avoid hearsay and, oh, we heard it did this and it did that. We're not going to get down that road. We're just going to take the things we can absolutely document and prove and say this is what it is. And then if you like what you see, well, okay. And if you don't like what you see, then I've also got some avenues that we can pursue to try to stop this. I think it was Paul that said we're in deep doo-doo. Depending on how you look at this, yes, that's a good way to look at it. However, and as Denise said, yeah, that's Paul's comment. We really have to shed the idea that we're a Democrat or a Republican or a Libertarian or an Independent or whatever it may be. Just kind of leave that at the door. Because for the next hour, we just want to forget about that. We're just community members. And we're here, and we're concerned about our kids. We want to make sure we understand what's going on. So with that, I'm going to take us right into Common Core. I broke this down. I say Common Core and data tracking. You will hear people talk about Common Core and data mining or data tracking as if somehow this is the same thing. Well, they're not exactly the same thing, but they go hand in glove. You don't get one without the other. But to be perfectly honest, no, they're not the same. Theoretically, you could have Common Core without having data tracking. That's only in theory. In practice, you don't. It's the transformation of American education because it is. If this is allowed to continue the way it is, American education will look nothing like it ever has before. So what is this animal called Common Core State Standards? What are they? How do they work? Well, let me quote Jeb Bush. Remember, I said this is apolitical. You're going to find people on the left who love this, people on the right who love this, people who in the middle who just absolutely adore this, and likewise take the other position. This is what Jeb had to say. There are a lot of people who feel this, meaning Common Core, is somehow a national takeover of what is the domain of local and state government. These are 45 states that have voluntarily come together to create fewer, higher, deeper standards. That when you benchmark them to the best in the world, they are world class. Over the next 55 or 60 minutes, we're going to find out how not one single word of that is true. Now, I don't believe that this guy is intentionally dissembling. I don't know the guy. I don't think he's an out-and-out, bald-faced, liar. I don't believe that. And he may believe everything he said, but he didn't do his homework. Common Core prepares students to be college and career ready. You may be shocked to find out that nobody actually knows what college and career ready is. When the group that wrote these Common Core standards first came together in 2008, they formed a bunch of committees. And they said, we need to find out if we can create a single test that will actually prove that somebody is college and career ready. And you know what they said in 2008 after a year of studying it? We can't find one. We have no way of actually measuring whether a student is ready for college and ready for a career in a single test. A year later, they came out with one and said, hey, let's go, we got it. Nobody knows where they came from. All we know is that one year they didn't know what it was, and next year they had the answer. I can't tell you how they did that because they've never shared that with anybody. Common Core is a massive enterprise. If you look up on the screen, you'll see that it was adopted by 45 states in one term, almost overnight. It affects almost 43 million children across the United States of America. 5.5 million kids in private school will be using Common Core. If you think, well, my kid's in private school, my kid's being homeschooled, or they're in a charter school, we don't have to worry about this stuff. I'm going to show you how you may have a little bit of insulation, but it's not a lot. And you do have to be concerned about it no matter where you are. Common Core is aligned with the SATs, the ACT, the GEDs, the AP. All of these are in perfect alignment right now. And if they're not there, they're being placed there. technology, computers, teachers' pay salaries, raises, schools are going to be monitored by the state monitoring system, are all decided by the results of this Common Core standards and the tests. It's estimated that the costs of Common Core will run upwards of $14 to $16 billion. This is on top of the seed money that was given to the states. Now, where do you think that $14 billion is going to come from? Well, I have an idea. But the states who took this, who got involved with Common Core, never really thought about this because that wasn't there. Something else was there that they really, really wanted. And that's why we got into this thing in the first place. In 2011, 45 states had signed on to Common Core. 2 years later, 62% of Americans had never even heard of it. And we had implemented something that essentially swept the entire nation and will be the single greatest change to our educational system since the existence of the country. And yet, 62% of Americans don't even know it exists. How did that happen? And so I'm not going to give you all the answers. I really kind of sometimes want to plant some seeds. Ask yourself, why in the world would somebody want something that's so mammoth and so ubiquitous to all of a sudden go into effect and 60% of the country doesn't know about it? Why would that be? Fremont School District in Illinois says the Common Core is a rigorous set of standards for the English language, arts, and mathematics curriculum that has been developed based on the best practices of schools and organizations around the country and the world. Well, if I listen to what Jeb Bush just had to say, if I listen to what Common Core has to say, and the Illinois School District has to say, I'd be jumping all over this thing. I'd say, wow, I want my kid to do better. This sounds good to me. Why don't we do this? The National Governors Association and Council of Chief State Officers, if you go to their websites, this is what they have to say about Common Core. I'm going to tell you why those two organizations are pretty important. They count. They say that these Common Core standards are state-led. They're internationally benchmarked. They have been very deeply researched. They were developed by teachers. They're rigorous, so they're stronger than anything we have out there right now. And it better prepares students for college. There's another one I missed on there. It's mobile, which means if your child lives in New Hampshire and they're going to get up and they move to Vermont or they move to Florida, guess what? The education is mobile. They can go right with it because they can move from one area to another and have that mobility, knowing the education, there'll be an educational link there. So all of these are the advantages of Common Core. So that's pretty cool. The National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State Officers are responsible for putting the standards together. They didn't actually write them, but they were responsible for them. But you see that second bullet up there? That's a baby. They own them. They own them. This is not public domain. Your teacher doesn't own them. The school doesn't own them. You don't get to say, I'm going to change this. Just imagine that you bought a house and you signed a contract. And then 6 months after you're in the house, you say, well, I don't like this deal anymore. You get to change your contract? No. Well, guess what? You don't get to change this one either. The only one that can change it are the people who are responsible for writing it, who own the copyright. Now, NGA and the Council of Chief State School Officers are actually two nonprofit organizations. They operate in Washington, D.C. There's nothing official about them. The NGA, the National Governors Association, sounds really important. It sounds like they represent all the governors, but all the governors aren't even members of it. They have no official capacity. They don't have no real authority. And all governors don't even pay dues. But if you go to NGA's website, here's what they say. We don't really care whether they pay dues or not. We consider them members. I like that. I like a club where I can count anybody I want to be a member, and they don't have to sign up. Well, that's kind of how NGA works. NGA has decided what these Common Core standards need to look like. But because they put their stamp on it, and they've got the name and Council of Chief State Officers, school officers, sounds so official looking. Wow, this I guess must be state-led, right? This looks like it comes from states. Well, these guys got together, and they took an older company called Achieve. And Achieve has actually been responsible for putting together the Common Core standards. They actually created those Common Core standards. Now, where do they get the money to do all this stuff? I always like to follow money, because usually if you follow the money, you'll find there's an interest there. It might be not quite always altruistic. Well, the National Governors Association gets some of their money from dues, but not the bigger bulk of it. They get a whole bunch of it from your tax dollars as they get filtered through the federal government. And they get a whole lot from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Let me say that again. Bill and Melinda Gates. Because you're going to find their stamp all over this. The Council of Chief State Officers gets their money from dues that come in, some from the federal government, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Achieve is a little bit different. They get most of their money from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Achieve is responsible for having written the Common Core standards. So we said it was state-led. Well, this is about as state-led as it gets. We'll go into how does that fit? How do you get to state-led from this? There are about 6 officers that sit on it are actually governors. And those governors actually sit on the National Governors Council. They sit on here. So that's about as close to state-led as this whole thing is going to get. There was a comment period, but there was no follow-up to the comments. So that's kind of, remember the old days you used to have this little suggestion box, you know, and you kind of drop your suggestion, there's a hole at the bottom, went into the trash can. You know, I don't know that that's exactly how this works. I don't know. So anyway, they partnered to create the Common Core standards, and of course funded by our dear friend Bill and Melinda. Standards drive tests that drive your child's curriculum. This is what we need to understand. Standards sound like a really good idea. I mean, I've been consulting in companies for years, and we try to create some kind of standards, try to operate by something. How can we improve our productivity? How can we improve our sales? How can we improve employee morale? So we kind of have standards and benchmarks we operate by. So this sounds reasonable. We're going to look in a moment at whether standards really equate to improved achievement. We need to look at that piece. But the standards drive your child's education. Arnie Duncan, everybody know who Arnie is?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, everybody. Okay. Arnie Duncan. If we're going to have world-class international standards, we need to have world-class evaluations behind them. So we're not just talking about standards anymore, are we? All of a sudden, we just made a leap into evaluations. Okay, all right, that's fair. That's fair, because you got to know how you're doing. That makes perfect sense to me. This is Dr. Jay Green out of the University of Arkansas. To make standards meaningful, they have to be integrated with changes in the curriculum, the assessment, and pedagogy. Wait a minute. We were talking about a set of standards. They were state-led, kind of. Now we're talking about assessments, and now we're talking about pedagogy. Well, now, aren't these three different? Oh, and I didn't mention tracking. Data tracking? Yeah. Aren't these all different things, or is this all the same thing? Where are we going with this stuff? Let's put it together. Common Core standards are simply standards you have to operate by. But I can't tell if the standard's any good unless I create some kind of an assessment to measure that standard. But if I control the standard and I control the measure, and then I tell my teachers that you're not going to get a promotion and you're not going to get a salary increase and you're not going to get tenure, and your school may have to be under state supervision unless you meet the requirements of these state standards, where do you think the teachers are going to be spending their time teaching? They're going to be teaching this stuff. They're going to teach all these standards over here, all these assessments over here, so the students can pass can meet the standards over there. So when you have standards and you have assessments, you automatically define the curriculum. You will hear people who will make this lofty distinction. Oh, you're talking about assessments. We're talking about standards, you utter fool. Don't you understand? Standards are one thing, assessments are another. Yeah, but what I really understand is the two are married, and they go together. Where there's a standard and there's an assessment, it necessarily drives the curriculum. Standards and assessments are now so embedded in the school system that here's what it looks like. The curriculum, the instructional materials, the teaching methods, even the college entrance examinations, all have been aligned with the Common Core standards and assessments. Everything's aligned with that. So how do I think outside of the box? There is no outside of the box. This is the box. This is what it looks like. Common Core plus statewide testing is centralized control of the entire U.S. system. Now, that's what it is. Some people don't mind that. And they don't mind it because they feel, look, states have had a lot of varying standards. So there's a mishmash of different standards from one state to the other. We finally have one set that's higher than most of them were, and in some ways they are. So why wouldn't we do that? How can you go wrong putting something together like that? Well, we're going to tear into that logic and see if it stands up. Common Core standards. Assessment designers when you signed on to the Common Core standards, you also had to agree to testing consortiums, to sign up with one of two different testing consortiums. And these are the folks: Smarter Balanced, SBAC, Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, and PARC, the Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Career. Anytime you hear the U.S. government talk about college ready and career ready, they're talking about one thing, and one thing only: Common Core. Those two, those are interchangeable. We're talking college and career ready, we're talking Common Core. Well, we already said we had the standards, so now we had to have an assessment to go along with it. So, son of a gun, $360 million went right into the pot to build that assessment for Smarter Balance. And where do you think Smarter Balance and PARC got $360 million? Bring them all with it. If you don't have anything left, now you know why. $360 million came all from the federal government. That's how this was funded. Here we go. Okay. I'm sorry, I forgot that. The minute they gave them the money, the minute the federal, the public, gave the money to Smarter Balance and PARC, the government had an obligation. They became a stakeholder in this venture. And therefore now the government has to look out for your interests. They have to take care of you. So the only way they can take care of you is they got to monitor all this stuff. Yeah, it sounds logical, right? Makes sense. They got to monitor it. Okay, getting a little tricky now. What are those Common Core standards? The government is in firm control of these state-led standards. After receipt of the grant award, any request for entrance into the consortium must be approved by the executive committee. Upon approval, the project management partner will then submit a change of membership to the U.S. Department of Education for their approval. So the government tells you that you have to sign this agreement, and then you sign the agreement, and they say, oh, wait a minute, we got to get it approved by the government first. Got it? But this is state-led. States are fully in charge of this. Race to the Top grant says that you can change up to 15% of these standards. That's good. I mean, this way the teacher has a say. Now let me see if I get this right. You pay your taxes, and you pay 100% of the taxes, and you pay 100% of the freight for this program to work, but you get 15% of the say. Okay, that doesn't sound like a really good deal. But even so, 15% is not too bad, until you understand how the 15% works. You can't change more than 15% of all of the standards for the entire state, in this case the state of New Jersey. So before, are there any teachers in here, by the way? Any educators? Oh, we've got some teachers. Okay, so before you can say, well, I want to change this because I think Alice, has other needs, and this isn't meeting those needs. You then have to go to your board, and then they have to submit that to the state, and then they have to submit that upline to NGA, and they have to decide that, well, wait, you guys are over your 15% or you're under 15%, and by the way, we get to change those, you don't. Well, Alice is already halfway through college by the time you figured out whether or not you can change that. That 15% is a nominalization. It has little or no effect on anything. There's a copyright notice, and you find this on Common Core's website. The NGA Center and the Chief Council on Chief State School Officers shall be acknowledged as the sole owners and developers of the Common Core state standards, and no claims to the contrary shall be made. That's what we have to say about your 15% idea. The standards are intended to be a living book. As new and better evidence emerges, the standards will be revised accordingly, but not by you. You don't hold the copyright. You don't get to do that. So this is a little frustrating for parents, because if they're trying to have a conversation with the kids' parents, the children's parents, students' parents, and say, we need to, with the teachers about their children's education, and they want to make some changes, they can't. Their hands are tied. The teachers' hands are tied. The parents' hands are disinvolved. They've literally been expunged from the process. Not fully expunged. That's a bad word. They've been diminished, their role in the process. Parents, teachers, school boards, administrators, even the State Department of Education are essentially shut out of this process, because these decisions were already made, state-led, mind you, by NGA, CCSSO, and put together by Achieve, and they're the only people who can actually make the changes on this. Corporations, nonprofits, and governments are in control. The standards have not been validated empirically, and no metric has been set to monitor the intended or the unintended consequences they will have on the education system. So you may see something that's not working, but what can you do about it? There's no system to do anything about it. There's a website that you can leave comments. You go to the EPA's website and leave a comment and say you don't think CO2 is really that big a deal? I know what happens. Well, that's about what happens when you try to get some feedback on Common Core. Or suppose you have a really serious problem. I mean, if my boiler doesn't work, I don't even have a boiler, but if I had a boiler and it didn't work, what do we have over there anyway? If that thing didn't work, I'd make a phone call, and even then I'd get frustrated because I couldn't get somebody to fix the thing. It would take me phone call after phone call. Imagine trying to call somebody in Washington, D.C. because your son failed the last test he took. And you don't think it's fair because he doesn't understand what you guys are talking about. And I'm a teacher, I'm the parent, and I can't help. Well, how did this thing called Common Core get into our community? Well, let's take a look. We have to understand, first of all, how the federal government works. They always work the same way. And it doesn't matter who's the president, so if you really like, Bush, that's good. If you really like Obama, that's cool. I don't really care. It works the same way no matter who's in there. The federal government goes to the states and they bilk them out of tax money. This is what it is. They reach in and they say, how much you got? We want it. So they take your tax money and then they go to the states and they say, hey, we're going to give you a little bit back, but we want something in return. It's called bribery. And that's how it works. It's worked that way for, I don't know, a couple hundred years. They take the money, filters it through there, grab a little for themselves for some of those nice golfing outings, whatever else these guys do. Then they say, hey, we'll give you some money, but in turn, we want something. So we did that with a thing called No Child Left Behind, which came out in 2002 by Mr. George Bush. No Child Left Behind was really cool. Everybody's screaming for bipartisanship. Well, this was it. This was Ted Kennedy and George Bush standing side by side, arm in arm, and they came out with one of the worst programs we've ever seen in education. But this is bipartisanship at its finest. No Child Left Behind kind of worked like this. Money was given to the states, but in turn, they had to do certain things. They had to have test requirements, they had reporting requirements, and there had to be proficiency standards that were established. This is the ultimate coming together of Democrats and Republicans. Democrats love to spend money and throw money at the problem. Well, we can just do that. Well, they got to do that. They got to throw a whole bunch of money at the problem. Republicans like to have some kind of standard, some kind of accountability. Well, they got what they wanted. So everybody went home happy, except the kids. Because do we really do anything that's going to improve the lot of children and help them become better educated? But that really wasn't, that's not there. We won't talk about it. States and teachers don't like it because they don't like all the reporting, they don't like the expansive testing, and we find out that teachers are saying, well, wait a minute, I now have to teach to the test, and I don't want to do that. Alice, I keep coming back to Alice. I don't know if there is anybody named Alice. We have a child named Alice. She's here. Alice may have needs other than just the dumb test. There may be another way to help Alice prosper and achieve and become successful. Well, they have to go by the test. Promotions and salaries based on the test. They didn't like the state management of schools based on the test results. And it created a whole patchwork of these state standards. Now, the reason they had a patchwork of state standards had to do with money. Because you see, the federal government can't come into the states and say, these are your standards. We're going to see the laws. There's 3 laws that say you don't get to do that. So Bush realized this, Department of Ed realized this. They said, okay, we can't create these standards. But your kids have to have standards, and they have to be able to pass those things. And if you pass them, you get money. And the guys running the state said, okay, well, if I make this test easy, I get lots and lots of money. So that's what happened. 75% of the states said, well, hey, we'll just make the standards lower, and then this is like, Santa Claus coming to town every day. So they got a whole bunch of checks coming in because they lowered standards. Other states did not do that. Massachusetts didn't do it, California didn't do it, Texas didn't do it. A lot of states didn't go down that road, but some did. But I want you to lock that up on one side of your brain and keep that there, because that's going to come back to play. That's a big one. The states intentionally, in many cases, lowered standards so that they could get more money. Keep that up there. It's going to come back to haunt them. In 2009, states were in desperate need of money. They had to have cash. What was going on in 2009? It was the height of the recession, right? It was the height of, that's over now. Is that over? Right. That was the height of the recession back in 2009. Okay? The states were aware that they needed cash. Okay? The stage was set for Common Core. all the pieces were in place for Common Core to come in. January 2009, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, otherwise known as the stimulus plan, gave $4.35 billion for a program called Race to the Top. Does anybody know what Race to the Top is? It's a slush fund. That's all it is. It's a slush fund. It's a big pile of money. There's no program. There's no curriculum. There's no plan. There's nothing. It's just a big pile of money. And it's all outlined of what you'd have to do to get that money in the Federal Register, which we've gone through rather in detail. In July of 2009, President Obama announced competition to receive money to close the school, the achievement gap in the schools. Well, that makes a lot of sense. We got all these schools that have these, variant patchwork of standards, I think you call it. So, why not? That kind of makes sense. So there's going to be a competition for the money. I love when the government runs a competition for us to get the money that we already gave them. Okay. So like most things with the federal government, there's a carrot and there's a stick. Right. So the carrot was this. You're going to get cash up front. We're going to kind of split up that $3.5 billion or $4.35 billion and kind of spread that around a little bit. And we're also going to give you those waivers. You know that No Child Left Behind that you can't stand, that you hate so much, all those tests that you have to take and assessments and reports that you have to turn and sitting there worrying about whether or not you're going to get a raise because of No Child Left Behind. Worry no more. You'll get a waiver if you pass the competition. Now, there are certain things though. Here's what we want in return. You have to agree to a common set of state standards. It doesn't say anything about Common Core in the Federal Register. There's not a word about Common Core in there. It says a common set of state standards. But what was the common set of state standards? Common set of state standards. There were not. There were not. But the present administration had an idea, and that's in the Federal Register too. It tells you where you can go to find that. You had to join a testing consortium. Remember those two I talked about, PARC and SBAC? You had to join one of these guys to test it, and you had to agree to create an interoperable longitudinal data system. Okay, that's all. No big deal. We just need these three little things. So you got to have some kind of common set of standards, which don't exist, but we just happen to have one right over here. You had to join a testing consortium, and you had to agree to create this interoperable database. Now, the secretary, this comes right out of the Federal Register, the secretary shall give special consideration to those states that agree to set up the interoperable database, and even more special consideration to those states that agree to have it hook in with the national database. And by the way, we want all those databases to be able to speak to our database at the federal government. That's really cozy. So all of these people can talk to one another. Now that sounds really good. Now I wouldn't want to put the wrong information in that database because that could get into the federal government, but they've assured us that that's not going to happen, and I have a guy up here saying, Marty said that will never happen. So we're okay here. Well, if you notice the timeline here, didn't we say it was in August? I think in 2009 the president came out and said, we're going to have this competition. NGA, remember who NGA was? National Governors Association? National Governors Association says in order to roll out a set of standards like this, it's going to take 3 years to do this, to get the states to buy on. Now think about that. Why would it take 3 years to get the states to buy on to something the state led? Okay. But anyway, so NGA thought it was going to take 3 years. President Obama didn't. He gave him 60 days. Got a little laser pointer somewhere around here. He gave him 60 days. He said, the standards were sent to the states in November of 2009. That's when they actually got the application for the standard. And the first phase of it was done by January 19th. By January 19th, you had to have the standards in. Anybody know what's going on between November of 2009 and January of 2010? What was going on?
Obamacare.
Well, Obamacare was going on. That's true. We got that signed in there. But the Senate signed it. But no, there was something else that was going on too. The country was broke.
The country was broke.
We're in the middle of the holiday season, and John can't find his laser. There we go. We're in the middle of the holiday season. The country's broke, and what are the states screaming for? Cash. The states need cash. So all of a sudden, there we go. So all of a sudden, November 12th, we come out and say, hey, you know what? If you just fill these things out, you got 60 days. Well, if you notice up here on the timeline, the standards weren't even drafted until March. And meanwhile, the states had to sign on and agree to the standards by January. So we had 40 states. We had 40 states sign on to this thing before they ever even saw them. And they call it buying a pig in a poke. I think there's a term for that one here. But this government tries to be fair. Says, all right, we're going to have a second rollout here. We're going to have a second phase that's due here in June 1st. One day before the actual standards are released. So we didn't want to take any chances. You might actually get a chance to see the final standards before they were done. The reality is most states never even saw the standard. I don't care if they're the best standards on the face of the earth. And they may well have been at this point. Nobody saw them. Nobody knew what they were. They signed on to this thing, and wait till you see what they signed on to. They signed on to a virtually sight-on standard. By August 2010, 11 states won the grant money. Congratulations, they won the grant money. By 2011, 44 states had signed on, others signed on after that. What in the world happened that got these people to sign on so fast to something that they never even read? It was easy. When they applied for the grant money, they automatically signed on. They didn't get a choice about it. They didn't have a choice. If they signed the grant, if they signed an application for the grant, they automatically were part of the program. The states automatically agreed to accept Common Core. They agreed to join one of the two testing consortiums, and they agreed to develop an interoperable statewide longitudinal system by winning this grant. The states agreed before seeing the grants. Few consulted with local boards of education. Don't forget, this happened. The bulk of these were signed up. Timeline's going. The bulk of these were signed up back at the end of 2009, beginning of 2010. A lot of the state legislatures weren't even in session. They were home. They were out shopping. They were taking their kids out for the week for the Christmas holiday. People weren't paying attention to this stuff, and that's when all of this got shoved through. Do you think it was an accident? Well, okay. Well, that's conspiratorial. I don't know. But it certainly was lousy timing. If somebody wanted people to have a really good insight into what was going on, to release it in November and say you got the Christmas holiday to sign this thing, or you could lose $100 million, right? That's not really a good way to do business. The database was a prerequisite. According to the National Center for Educational Statistics, the Recovery Act required Race to the Top funds be awarded to states that have made significant progress in establishing such longitudinal data system. The federal government in the Federal Register is obsessed. I think I have the Federal Register number here somewhere. You must read this thing. They are obsessed with getting this database set up. Even though they say it's not part of Common Core, and technically they're right, they were obsessed with having a longitudinal database established and was able to communicate with the federal government. Why? Why? The federal government can't have this information anyway, and they've already sworn up and down they don't access it. So what was the big deal about this database? In August 2011, President Obama hadn't gotten everybody he wanted to sign into this program yet. So he went back to the states that didn't, and he said, we'll give you those waivers, guys. They're here. Just, you don't want to do that. You don't want that old George Bush stuff there. Why don't you come and join me? States had to accept Common Core, though. They had to enroll in the testing consortium, and they had to set up the longitudinal data system. When Brookings Institute analyzed this, here's what they said. The NCLB waiver authority does not grant the Secretary of Education the right to impose any conditions he considers appropriate on states seeking waivers. It is absolutely illegal for the Department of Education to go to the states and say, I'll forgive that, but in turn you have to do this. They don't get to do that. Congress gets to do that. That's usurping authority. What you're looking at is the law being broken. So what was so important about these standards that were willing to tell everybody they're state-led, which we're going to look at really closely right now. They were going to tell everybody that, the minute you sign on here, you're going to hook into having these three prerequisites. What's the big deal? What's so important about it? And I got to break the law to do it too. What's going on with this thing? A lot of people signed on. People in the gray and the red states signed on. Only the blue states up there refused to sign on at the very beginning. But you see those red states? Now they're having questions. They all signed on, but now they're starting to say, wait a minute, maybe this wasn't such a good idea. So they're having second thoughts about this thing. Some are fighting back, but let me show you what it takes to fight back. You're going to be surprised. It's going to take a lot. It's going to take a lot more than a phone call. It's going to take a lot more than a march on Washington. That's not going to change anything. You're going to have to really get serious, unless you like it, in which case just have another beer. But if you don't like this thing, then you got a challenge behind it. Let's look behind the scenes of the Common Core standards. There are 3 laws that prevent the federal government from engaging in education on the state's level. And they're pretty definitive in those laws. 1965 ESEA Act, nothing in the act shall authorize the federal government to mandate, direct, or control school curriculum. That's pretty clear. 1970 General Education Act, no provision of any applicable program should be construed to authorize any agency to exercise any direction, supervision, or control over curriculum in the states. And in 1979, when the Department of Education was created, it was forbidden to exercise any direction, supervision, or control over curriculum or program of instruction of any school system. Does it get any more clear than that? The federal government cannot get involved in local education. It cannot. It is absolutely forbidden by law to get involved. That's why they call it state-led. It has to be called state-led. If it's not called state-led, then immediately the whole thing's illegal. So it has to be a state-led entity. Whether or not it is, that becomes another issue. Standards are a federally mandated condition for receiving RTT grant money. That's how it works. So you can argue that the government didn't create the standards. They just incentivized the standards. They made it really, really easy for you, or hard for you to say no to them. Excuse me. If you look at the Race to the Top grant application, that's a picture of the front page right there. It says the states must show commitment to adopting a common set of high-quality standards as set forth in Appendix B. Roll ahead to Appendix B, and there it is, and here's what it says. The states were required to sign an agreement with the copyright owners of Common Core, CCSO, and NGA. They didn't have a choice. So, is it states-led? Is it government-led? What you've got is somebody gaming the system. That's what you've got. Technically, this is like the guy, this is probably a bad example. The guy that robs a bank, he sets up a bank robbery, and he gets all of his henchmen to go rob the bank, and he goes and plays with his grandkids. And then we get him in court and says, hey, it wasn't me, I was over here, my granddaughter's birthday party. That's kind of what's going on here. It's called gaming the system. No, the government didn't write the standards. That's absolutely. But they did everything to see that the states took them or else. And wait till you see some of the or else's. This is only the beginning of the or else's. This document commits states to a state-led process that will lead to the development and adoption of Common Core state schemes. Okay? They were done. When the federal government issues educational funding linked to standards and curriculum, it is essentially the de facto mandate over which parents and teachers have no control. If there's any teachers in this room, I suspect that the NGA probably didn't call you up and say, hey, what do you think of these standards, guys? Come over and give us some input on this. No. You probably had nothing to say, and even if you did, you probably wouldn't have known where it went anyway. Owners of Common Core are funded by the federal government, NGA and CCSS. The Gates Foundation paid for developing Common Core, and the federal government made the states an offer they couldn't refuse to accept the Common Core standards. The government paid for all of the testing. The Common Core standards were assessed. Well, the federal government paid for the firm that did the assessment, and they put the firm together that did it. They put the people on the panel. President Obama said in 2013 State of the Union speech, we have convinced almost every state to adopt Common Core through the Race to the Top. Okay, is this state-led? No. Let me give you one last thought here. If this is state-led, how come the leaders of the state had to find out about the federal government that it even existed, from the federal government that it even existed? Most of them didn't even know of it until the government said, hey, we got this great opportunity for you. So I say they're not state-led. And if you can prove otherwise, I'm game. Most states never saw the standards before adopting them. No state researched or field tested the standards. No state compared the Common Core standards to any others. No state reviewed if the standards would help their students. Most states never even talked about the recurring costs. Remember that 14 billion I put on the slide? Did you hear any talk about this in your neighborhood? When they talk about how wonderful Common Core is, say what's going to cost it, they talk about what this technology is going to cost. We need to be talking about that stuff because this isn't free. Even if it was the best plan in the world, is this the way we want to go? That's what we have to look at. We always have to be questioning. There weren't public hearings. There were no clear responses to the comments. So the people who manage Common Core will tell you, oh, the teachers were involved. Well, yes, they were. There were teachers involved. But they didn't make the final decisions. Teachers were not involved in the final decisions. Teachers were not involved in the validating committee that actually said these things are valid, they need to go forward. They were not. Well, actually, a couple were, and the ones that were said we don't want it. The validating committee members were sworn to secrecy.
Here we go again, right?
Okay? Sworn to secrecy. What happened to that transparent? Well, transparent,
Right.
administration. They were sworn to. They had to sign a non-disclosure agreement before they even started going through the process. They had to agree they'd never tell anyone. Okay, this is states law. Okay. Are they internationally benchmarked? Because that's the other big claim. Didn't Jeb Bush say that? Yeah, Jeb Bush did. Yeah, they're deeper standard, the best in the world. These are world-class standards based on data. There's no research that exists anywhere that you can find that shows it was analyzed against any particular country and then benchmarked and then developed from there. Now, I've done benchmarking through my business. We do benchmarking standards for organizations and companies, sometimes pretty big companies. This isn't how you do a standard. This isn't how you benchmark, I can tell you that. There's no record of any country or countries being benchmarked, nor the methods that were used to collect and analyze the data. It doesn't exist. Now, maybe they did it, but they just didn't share it with anybody. There's no record of how data was incorporated into the Common Core model, and we don't know what country they followed. Was it Sweden? Was it Canada? Was it Australia? I mean, Canada and Australia, they don't use a set of common standards. They go by their provinces. Each province uses it, and both of them are doing a lot better than we are. So why are we in this in the first place? Denmark uses standards. Their kids are doing terrible. So what are we supposed to, I don't know. How does this all work? I'm not too sure. Well, if you go to the Common Core website, it says, we'll tell you all about our international benchmarking. All you have to do is go to Appendix A here. I think that's what, yeah, Appendix A. There. If you go to Appendix A, it'll tell you all about our international benchmarking. So, little me, go ahead, Appendix A. Well, there it is. That's the whole part on international benchmarking. Okay, neither can I. Essentially, it lists 3 different items up here. One of the items it says we really can't do anyway because we're not allowed to do that in the United States, but we do it in spirit. And the other 2 items are pretty basic. Say you have to read before you write an essay, and the other one says you have to write essays. You say, yeah, we do all that stuff. That's it. This is their international benchmark. There's nothing on this sheet of paper that I could have run off by studying the computer one afternoon and doing a little bit of a Google search. I could have pulled this all up. That's their international benchmark. Now, maybe there's something else somewhere, but if there is, you're going to have a rough time finding it. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Sandra Stotsky. Dr. Stotsky is well-renowned. She worked in Massachusetts. She developed standards on her own, and there's some of the finest and highest standards in the country. She knows her stuff. She also happens to be an English language arts specialist. She actually knows her business. She sat on the validating committee. She was one of the members of the validating committee. The validating committee, she says, existed as window dressing to rubber stamp, not improve whatever standards were. This is from the woman sitting. There were 30 people sitting on that validating committee, and there were some teachers there. Yes, absolutely, some teachers. A lot of test people, a lot of folks from the testing industry were over there, and there were 5 academics. And 2 people actually were qualified. They actually taught English language arts, were specialists in English language arts, and math. None of those 5 people approved these standards, by the way. When the names of the standards committee were released, according to Dr. Stotsky, when they were released, guess what? There weren't 35 names. There were only 25 names. Only 25 names. The 5 people who rejected it were all left off. But since they'd already signed a disclosure agreement, non-disclosure agreement, saying, hey, we're not going to tell anybody, who would ever know? So for a long time, Common Core was able to go around and say, hey, 100% of the validating committee has signed off on this. Well, that changed because people started saying, well, wait a minute, she was over there. What happened to her name? Let me just put it back on again. Despite making regular requests since September 2009 for evidence of international benchmarking, I received no material on academic expectation of other leading nations in mathematics or language and literature. Nothing. The woman tried again and again and again to get some kind of a record that these things were internationally benchmarked. If they are internationally benchmarked, it is one of the world's best kept secrets as to how they managed to accomplish that. Maybe if we look at Common Core's own website, we can get to what's going on. If you looked at that website back in 2010, here was what it said, unequivocally. The Common Core standards are internationally benchmarked. The President of the United States said, we have international standards, we have to have world-class career and college and career-ready students graduating from our schools. Everything is international, benchmarked against international standards. That was 2010. Let's take a look at their website in 2013. It changed, doesn't say that anymore. Now it says international standards were consulted in the development process. I'm not sure what that means. It sure doesn't mean you were benchmarked. I can consult, Harry's Bar and Grill one afternoon over a Heineken, but I'm not sure what this all means. If you look at it now, here's what it says. The standards were informed by the best in the country and the highest international standards. So we went from being benchmarked to being consulted to being informed. Now that's on their own website. So are these internationally benchmarked? There's a Q&A on Common Core, and I urge you to go to Common Core's website and look at it. What a dance. They asked the question, it's one of those myths versus fact. We're going to shatter this myth that these kooks out there think that we're not internationally benchmarked. And in doing so, they do this verbal dance that is almost humiliating to read your way through. But read through it. It's interesting education. Washington, D.C. language arts standards are clearly superior to the Common Core standard. The Thomas Fordham Institute studied these standards. So somebody had to test the standards to see if they're any good. You know who paid the Fordham Institute? Take a wild guess. Bill and Melinda Gates. Yes, they did that. They had their checkbook handy. In spite of having some of the highest ELA standards in the nation, the D.C. Public schools ranks in the lower half of urban school districts. So the question is, do the standards even mean anything? What do they mean? Teachers, ever since Bush and Kennedy, I guess, Bush and Kennedy put together that bipartisan deal on No Child Left Behind, teachers have been telling us these standards are overrated. They don't really mean all that much because children are individuals. Well, now here we're saying, here's a district that scored has some of the highest standards out there, and they've got some of the worst graduating kids, worst scores. In fact, if we look on this chart, California and Washington have math standards that are both higher than Common Core. Yet look where they fall here. Here's California, out of all 50 states, I don't know what that is, you're down here somewhere. And here's Washington, D.C., dead last. And yet they have standards that are higher than Common Core standards. So this has nothing to do with the standards. We're not saying they're good, bad, or indifferent. We're saying they don't matter. We're saying we're putting all our eggs in a basket that's empty. It doesn't make any difference whether or not these Common Core standards are good, bad, or indifferent. The 2007 Trends in International Math and Science study, 9 of the lowest scoring countries in math and 8 of the 10 highest scoring countries in math all use centralized educational systems. So what difference does it make? The answer is none. There's absolutely no relationship between standards and student performance. So why are we lassoing our children into it? Why is the federal government obsessed with having standards? Now, logically, I can tell you, it sounds like it makes sense. If we have standards, we raise the kids, how can we possibly do that? It sounds like it makes sense. But we know empirically it does not make any sense, and it simply doesn't work. So why are we doing what doesn't work? The Thomas Fordham Institute studied the Common Core assessments, and then he compared them to the states to see how they stacked up. And that's a reasonable thing to do. Common Core came in higher than 3/4 of the states. But what does it mean? Do you remember when we talked about No Child Left Behind? What did the states do to get the money? They lowered the standard. So the fact that Common Core came in and it's even higher, we're not setting the bar very high. It doesn't mean much. If you're talking about matching us internationally, we can't compete because they've already been set below other nation standards. So if the standard is the benchmark that you're using, then why would you use states that automatically have such low standards as a measure of comparison? What about the states that had standards that were higher? And what do you do? So am I supposed to bring my children down to meet these standards? Am I supposed to hold my son back or my daughter back? Yeah, that's exactly what the system does, because there is no allowance for anything other than the standard. What you find, the way this is put together, the standard, the assessment, the curriculum, and now the college entrance exam. They're all put together with an eye toward we've got to get every kid in the country college and career ready. We have to get everyone into college, and then we got to get them out of college and into a career. That's the goal. Isn't that what all parents want? Well, that's what we're going to do. Well, I'm a parent, I'm a grandparent. No, I don't want that for any of them. I don't even care if they go to college. I have a son who didn't want college. He hated it. He's doing great right now. So, and I know there's stories like this. I didn't bring a personal story up. I know there's stories like that out there. No correlation between standards and student performance anyway, so even if your standards were high, what difference did it make? And why aren't we asking these questions? As parents, why aren't the teachers asking? Well, not the teachers. They're caught in the crosshairs. They're caught in the middle. Why? What do you find out what happened to the unions? The unions are supporting this, by the way. If you talk about teachers caught in the crosshair, we can see this one. But what happened that the governors who signed on to this thing and the state legislators didn't ask these questions before they ran to get this money? There's no evidence that these things were internationally benchmarked or that they were ever field tested. Not one of these standards has been tested in the field to find out whether it's going to function or not. What you're looking at is an experiment. The fellow you see up here right now, Jason Zimba, is one of 3 lead authors of the Common Core standards. What this guy says counts, and he's responsible for the math standards. When he was asked if the math approach that they used, this lady was talking about, it was lattice math. You know, lattice math, you draw little squares, you want to look like 50 times 50, you draw a little box, and you cut it in diagonals, and you add them all up, and all that kind of crazy stuff. Okay. When asked if the math approach had ever been tested, he said it's a decades-long experiment. That's a long way of saying no. Do I really want my son and my daughter being experimented on? Do I want them part of your experiment? Is my kid part of a control group now? The answer is yes. 42.9 million kids are part of a control group. This other fellow, David Coleman, is called the lead architect. If you don't know his name, don't forget his name. Don't forget. This is the lead architect. He's the guy who's mainly responsible for putting the pieces together. And he happens to be a pretty decent fellow. Surprise, surprise. He's not an evil guy. He doesn't want to damage your children, but he looks at the world through a really bizarre lens. And we're going to show you that lens in just a minute. David Coleman, when asked if standards had ever been successfully used, said, are you ready for this? Talking about teachers getting set up, this is it. When asked if the standards had ever been successfully used, he said, the how remains in the teacher's hands. Put that one up here and think about it. When this thing falls flat on its face, who do you think is going to get blamed? The teachers.
Yeah.
The teachers are going to get hammered for this because they're going to say you're not following the standards, you're not doing this the way it's supposed to be done. If you had, the children would have learned. Remember, the theory that these guys are operating on is a mechanized, roll-it-out assembly line process. If I have the same standard, and I got the same test, and I got the same curriculum, and I ask the same questions, then I ought to get the same results. They believe it. Bill Gates believes this. What does Bill Gates do for a living? Or did for a living? He creates software. And what does software do? You kind of mastermind all these zeros and ones and you make stuff happen. And if I get the right zeros and ones in the right place, something's going to happen. It's mechanized, it's automated, it's elegant, and it works. This is the world that this gentleman comes from. A world of data and math and numbers and strategies. And if you put all the pieces together, then you ought to get the same result. But what they're all forgetting, Mr. Gates, his heart may be in the right place. I don't know. This guy's heart may be in the right place. Children are individuals. They're human beings. My daughter went to college. Again, I don't know anybody else's kids, so I got to stick in mine. She went to college, and that worked out. My son tried. He fell flat in his face. Now he flies first class all over the world, constantly, for a job that most people give their eye teeth to have. He never went to college. So it doesn't really matter. What matters is the individual that you have. And you've all got a story like this. You've all got children like this.
John, isn't
Well,
also like rewriting the SAT scores now?
we're going to get to that.
Okay.
Yeah. James Milgram was a professor at Stanford University, math professor. He was in charge of the validating committee on the math side. It was his job to see that this either works or it doesn't work on the math side. He said that Algebra 2 is not even required until the 9th grade. Now, algebra typically is taught in 8th grade, and there's a reason for that. Children are at disadvantage for engineering, science, and for the STEM side, for science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And what the Common Core has now is this thing called Algebra 2 Lite. So they do have an Algebra 2 course, but it really doesn't have all the requirements it normally as a teacher would have in teaching Algebra 2 to the students. And what happens is, because the child is behind in high school, when they get into college, they have to go into remedial work because they're not prepared to do it. So that all of a sudden puts us at a disadvantage in competing with other students. But it gets even more interesting. The race to the top application, in order to apply for the money, the heads of the universities in each state must agree that if a student passes the SAT, Basic Math, or Algebra 2, they're specifically not permitted to place them in remedial courses. Now let's take a look at that again. That's huge. Let me just back up, because I went through that real fast. Let me back up on that again. We've already said that we've lowered the standards for math in high school. They're lower. So now what we've done is we've said, when you signed the race to the top agreement, you had to therefore agree that the presidents of the state institutions, the state public colleges and universities in your state, had to agree that if a kid took the SATs and passed the math on that, you could not put him in a remedial class in college. You had to put him in a regular credit-bearing course. 60% of the kids going into college go into remedial work. 40% of them going into college right now go into remedial math. There will be no remedial math. It will be a college-bearing course. So essentially, how can a college do that? There's only one way they can do that. They have to dumb down the course. Think of the implications of what I'm talking about. There is no other way to do this. You have to dumb down the course. Now we're going to talk about what Denise mentioned here in just a minute. We're going to see that these kids don't have to learn as much to get into college. So do we all get the implication? This is big. This is the reason why. You can't say to yourself, well, look, even if it's a standard, the standard's a little higher than what we had, so isn't that a good deal? Excuse me, isn't that a good deal? Why don't we just train to that? They got to come out better than they were before. Well, there's two problems with it. Number one, the standards don't prove anything anyway, so there's no correlation there. But even if it did, number two, the standards are set in such a way that the colleges are having to lower the curriculum quality in order for the kids to get through so that they can get their money. Why? Because that was part of the race to the top agreement. That's also in the Federal Register. The math standards, as Zev Werman used to be with the Department of Education, the math standards would graduate students below the admission requirements of most four-year state colleges. Even that fellow who just showed me with the math back here, Mr. Zimba, he even said that at best this is going to get you into a non-selective school or something. He didn't use the word community college, others have used that, but a non-selective college. It's not going to get you into a good college. It's going to get you into a non-selective college, a two-year course. It's not going to get your students, your children, into the kind of school that you would aspire to get them into. That he did say, that's a quote. In 2012, this gentleman, remember this guy back here? Where was he? There we go. Remember the architect? Remember I said this is the architect that actually put the Common Core standards together? Well, he got promoted. He's not with Common Core standards any longer. He got promoted, and he's now the president of the college boards. He's the president of the college boards. You know what the college boards write? The SATs. They write the college entrance exams. And here's what was already been done. This is done. This doesn't have to be done. This is finished. This is what he's done with the college entrance exams. 2013, the SATs and the APs were redesigned to align with Common Core. They removed the vocabulary section. All right, no penalty for incorrect. Yeah, you're in. They removed the penalty for incorrect answers. Do you understand what that means? When I take that means I can guess and it counts, and if I'm wrong, I don't lose. I can't go wrong. They scrapped the essay portion, and they dropped math that's not needed because it's non-selective or community for non-selective or community colleges, or if it's not career needed. They dropped the math. Why did they drop the math? Because Mark Tucker, who will get Mark Tucker, he's another guy who's a player in this whole thing. Because he said that only 5% of the people actually ever go on and need higher math, actually ever go into any of these STEM courses. So why do we need to teach to everybody when it's only 5%? Okay? These are the same people that said one of the selling points is that it's portable. You can take it from one community to another if you happen to move, and that only ever happens to 2%. But somehow 2% was a big deal, but 5% doesn't matter. There's no logic here. Or either that or somebody's being disingenuous. Academically driven design is developmentally unsuitable. If you talk to developmental instructors, developmental psychologists, child psychologists, they'll tell you this thing is just a disaster waiting to happen. I've seen reports coming out, I think it was New Hampshire, I'm not sure, where more and more child psychologists are stepping up and they're saying, we're getting people, our offices are getting flooded with people, and we're finding out it's Common Core that's doing it. Well, let me explain what's going on. There was no childhood development psychologist on the final work groups or on the validation committee. They were not there. Standards appear to work back from the college career, from the college career ready formula, and much math material was developmentally inappropriate. Children go through different phases. Now, I taught actually the primary grades at this when I taught elementary school. I was 1, 2, and 3 down there. And kids go through this concrete phase where everything's brilliant. They got to see it and they make, hard memories out of it. And then they go through an abstract phase where they can begin to put kind of squishy stuff together. Where now, this is 2 and 2 equals 4. I get it. But if you take a child who's in the first grade and you say, well, okay, here's a picture of 2 blocks, and here's a picture of 3 blocks over here, and here's one of 5 blocks. What do you see? Well, he sees 2 blocks, 3 blocks, and 5 blocks. He doesn't see that the 2 and the 3 equals the 5. He doesn't put that together. One psychologist I was listening to gave a great explanation of this. If you tell a child of this age bracket, look at your watch, and when it looks like this and it's 5 o'clock, or whatever it looks like backwards. It looks like, I can't do that. When it looks like 5, I need to go to the Common Core. When you see that it's 5 o'clock, and the little hands here and the big hands here, I want you to come in and stop playing. My kids go, okay, I'll do that, Mommy. So you see hands on the 5, hands on the 12, trots in. Okay, already done. And that works fine, and Mom's bragging, whoa, my kid can tell time. No, your kid can't tell time. Because like the psychologist said, if that clock stopped at 10 minutes to 5, she would sit out there and play for hours and hours and hours because, hey, it's not 10 o'clock, it's not on the 12. Maybe while Mom's sitting home and going crazy, where's my kid? They're just not ready for that stuff. Common Core is full of information like that. Let's see this next slide. Yeah, this is what I was hoping was here. I pulled this off the Common Core website. These are the standards for math practice in K through 12. Now, if you understand how this thing, and I urge you to spend some time on that site and kind of fish around it. These are the standards from K through 12. They leave it up to the teachers to make it applicable to their age, to the age group. There's nothing in there about child psychology. Now, imagine your child is in the first grade, because this does. As a teacher, here's your challenge. You have your child, the learner, has to make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. Here's another one of the standards. They have to reason abstractly and quantitatively. What first graders reasons abstractly and quantitatively? How are they going to do that? Construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others and attend to precision. Kids are coming out of this stuff and they are stressed. They're coming home to Mom and Dad and they're in tears when they come home. We now know that when children get stressed in school, they go through all kinds of things that are inappropriate. They start nail biting, sucking on their thumbs, twiddling on their hair. They had any hair. They twiddle on their hair up there. They do all things. They'll start picking on the kid next to them, making noise, and what happens? When the child starts picking on the child next to him or making noise or being fidgety, what do? We send them down to the principal's office. We send down to the school psychologist's office. Or we write them up because we got a problem child over here. You don't have a problem child. You have a child that has no interest in the information that you're providing them that's not developmentally appropriate. That's probably one of the biggest sins of this program, is it doesn't understand what children are and who they are and how they learn. This is supposed to be about kids, not about the system, and it is. If you look at even the college, the way they've revamped this whole entry into college thing, which is ludicrous. Children would come through school, and then if they maybe didn't do a good job, but they wanted to get in college, they'd take those SATs, and they would be boning and studying and working hard because they knew they had to get past that SAT to get into college. And then 40% of them knew in math, I'm going to have to take a remedial course, but at least I'll get myself up to par and I'll stretch. And that stretch is important. That's gone. We took it out. Why should they have to stretch that far? Just back it off and make it a little easier. So instead of having the SATs fundamentally based on college and the needs of that, now they're based on Common Core and K through 12 and the needs of that. We just reversed the whole system. This is changing the whole society. It sounds good on the surface. Parental involvement is the single greatest factor in student achievement. I can't impress you with that too much. Decades of research show, this is from the Michigan Department of Education. Decades of research show when parents are involved, students have higher grades, higher test scores, and higher graduation rates. Parental involvement in children's education from an early age has a significant effect on educational achievement and continues right into adulthood. That comes out of London Institute of Education. Enterprise schools in Alabama, I think they are. The more intensely parents are involved, the more beneficial the achievement effects. There is nothing, there is no single indicator of a child's success and achievement more than the relationship that the parent has with the child and the teacher in school. Parents have to be involved. Yet what in the world does this thing do? It creates a barrier. Common Core creates a barrier between the very people that need to be there to help the child. The student is the one who suffers from a product like Common Core when the teacher and the child's parent can't get together and decide, this is what's better for my daughter, this is what's better for my son, this is what we have to do. Aren't our children all unique? They better be. Well, if they're not unique, and all I can do is just plug them into a bunch of zeros and ones and pump them out the other end, that's a pretty, that's not a really kind of world I think I want to be in. So what harm can this do? There's a limited emphasis on individuality and personal success. You don't hear talks about personal success. You talk about being a global citizen. It's not about individuals. Teachers are handcuffed by these standards. Their pay, their promotion, their reviews, all based on the standards. Teachers have less time to display the excellence. There are some wonderful teachers. When I taught my first year, there was a guy named Mr. King. I'll never forget. He was up in 6th grade. The kids went to his class. We taught in South Philly. It was a rough area. They went to Mr. King's class, and they were like angels in there, and they learned. And I learned from Mr. King because he was outrageous. Today, Mr. King wouldn't even be allowed in a classroom. There's no provision for teachers or parents to alter the standards. They say they can alter them, but how are you going to do that? It's lip service. Schools are stuck with the standards. State management is based on test results. College entrance exams have been lowered. College remediation classes have been redefined. Parents cannot relocate to avoid the standards because they're all over the country. We said they're what, 45 states? It doesn't matter where you go. So you can't even say, well, I want to go over here because it's a better school district. In some little ways, you might be able to get a little better school district out of it, but essentially you're learning all the same stuff. Standards will affect private schools and even homeschooling, as we said before. Now let's talk about the data tracking. Arnie Duncan, we all know Arnie, right? Arnie Duncan, this is what he said in 2013. The Common Core has become a rallying cry for the fringe. And I want you to understand this. Because when you go out there and you say, oh, this stuff is bad for my son or my daughter, this is what you're going to be up against. Let me show you what the other side's saying. When the critics can't persuade you that the Common Core is a curriculum, they make outlandish claims. They say the Common Core calls for federal collection of student data. Well, for the record, we're not allowed to do that, and we won't. He then challenged the press to tell the truth, and he said, if you can find any of these things happening, then produce the evidence, because they simply don't exist. Really? Okay. Let's take a look at the evidence. This is the race to the top agreement between the testing consortiums and the states. Remember, if your state went with the race to the top, they then had to sign an agreement with one or two testing consortiums. This is the agreement with PARC. Okay, let's look at it and see what it says. The state must identify and address the legal, statutory, regulatory, and policy barriers it must change in order for the state to adopt and implement the consortium's assessment system components. One of those components is the interoperable database. Okay. So the federal government forced you to sign an agreement with a group that said you have to share information with that group. Okay? Fair enough. Now this is between the, another page in the same one, sorry, page 15. The states will use the consortium-developed assessment system to meet the assessment requirements of Title I. I forgot, I want to throw that in there. Title I. Everybody know what Title I is? Everybody live in New Jersey? It's called $300 million a year. That's what your Title I funds are. You get $300 million a year from the federal government in Title I funds. You want to know why Chris Christie said yeah? Because they're threatening to take the Title I funds away if you don't sign on to this stuff. That's why he said yeah. In here it says, in the agreement signed between, in this case, PARC, and the testing, which is the testing consortium, and the states will use the consortium-developed assessment system to meet the assessment requirements in Title I of the Education, Elementary Secondary Education Act. That's something like that. Okay. And by the way, in case you don't like what it says, Mr. State, who's state-led, you're the governor, let me tell you something. Go to page 16. Conflicts which may arise regarding the interpretation of the clauses of this memorandum will be resolved by the governing board, and which you're not of, by the way. And that decision will be considered final and not subject to further appeal or to review by any outside court or other tribunal.
Oh, boy.
Now you feel in charge. You just signed away all of your rights. Now here's the agreement that testing company signed with the Department of Education. Now remember, we just signed an agreement to create a pipeline to send the data to the testing consortium. Okay, here's the agreement they signed with the government. The grantee, Park, must provide timely and complete access to any and all data collected at the state level to the Department of Education. Everyone? Okay. Okay, Arnie. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I don't think so. I think you're sharing data. But the data can't be shared because we got things to protect our students. We all have HIPAA, right? We got HIPAA. We got HIPAA that protects our medical information, so they can't get that. We got FERPA. Everybody heard of FERPA? The Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. Yeah, so our kids are protected 6 ways from Sunday. Congress set all this up. No, we're done. We're safe. We got it all made. Except for one thing. In 2009, Sebelius changed HIPAA. It now says in section 160.103, part 2, protected health information excludes individually identifiable health information in education records covered by FERPA. It's excluded. You are not covered. Your children's protection is not there. They took it out. But we still have FERPA, right? Really? Let's go look at FERPA. Because FERPA was changed also after this came out. Data that can now be tracked without parental consent. They do not have to go to mom and dad to ask this. Blood type, hobbies, family social security numbers, nicknames, family voting status, finger and eye prints, religion. This, by the way, came out of the Federal Register from July 29, 2009. This information, they do not need consent to share information on your child with local school districts, leaders, community members, unions, researchers, stakeholders, and policymakers. By the way, let me get that union thing out of the way. Remember I said the unions are in favor of this? Guess who they got a great big fat check with? Bill. Exactly. PTA did also. They got $1 million. PTA got $1 million in marketing funds to approve this thing. I said, this is an uphill fight. If you think you're going to just go down and talk to your congressman and get rid of this, it's not going to work that way. More groups can access student data now without parental consent. None of these people listed up here needs to talk to mom and dad before they can get this information. Now, a lot of this is here already. That's been put in there already. But the last one in bold, this information on your child can now go to institutions to develop, validate, or administer predictive testing. Okay, so who's that? These are outside consulting firms who can then share it with whoever they feel necessary. In other words, there is no FERPA anymore, guys. And there is no HIPAA as far as your children are concerned. They've been gutted. So when your school administrator says to you, oh, no, you don't understand. We have a database here, but we have FERPA. This is compliant with FERPA. It means nothing. And they will say that, because we've heard that. They'll say, oh, we're FERPA compliant. It doesn't matter. FERPA's been gutted. It's useless. This guy, remember who he is? David Coleman. He is the president of the college boards, and he looks at the world as a data point. This is the man who's in charge of seeing that your children get into college and what that's going to look like when they get there. He sees your kids as data points. Now, I'm going to play this, and I'm going to pray this works. Hold on, because half the time it doesn't. Let's give it a shot here. And listen to what he has to say.
When I was involved in convincing governors and others around this country to adopt these standards, it was not Obama likes them. Do you think that would have gone well with the Republican crowd? So what you'll find of me as the new president of the College Board is I'm obsessed with moments where there is overwhelming evidence. Does that make sense? And a moment of action to be taken. And I think we have discovered ones that I believe Dan Wagner may have talked to you about already yesterday. Did he share some of this already? Some, says Aaron, to my right. I want to introduce a topic, but as I introduce it, I want to talk about another man who used data to change the world, someone who I admire quite a bit. Because, again, as you think about your power and your force in this world, let's remember who really won the election. Shall we call it Nate Silver? Against all the blowhards of political commentary, the predictions of the nerds were decisive. But perhaps more exciting than the person who stood to the side and handicapped the election is the person who led the Obama campaign's use of data to galvanize a generation of low-income people to vote like they had never had before. Whether you are Republican or Democrat, the simple precision and excellence of the use of information to achieve a result is something in my...
I'm not even going to go on. You get it? This guy's in charge of the college entrance examinations. This guy's in charge of what college looks like when your kid goes through, and he's in charge of the data. You think he's just going to use that to make sure they all get A's and B's and go out and become chief executive officers? You think that? Well, maybe you do think that. That's the guy in charge. Talk about data tracking. Data tracking is something else. This firm, the federal government is obsessed with tracking data. It's in the Federal Register. See all the times it talks about this. Heaven forbid, this interoperable states longitudinal data system. Now, state longitudinal data systems have been around for a long time. They're nothing particularly new. But what happens is every time the federal government passes a new regulation, they up the ante on what it has to look like. And now it's suddenly taken a direct pipeline from your child's school right into the Department of Education. Well, indirectly, it goes back to the Department of Education. But they're not interested in tracking our kids' data. Let's take a look at this. This is a document you can find online. If not, it's on my website, sustainablefreedomlab.org, under resources. Promoting grit, tenacity, and perseverance in the 21st century. Put out by the Department of Education. You see that now? It's put out by the Department of Education. Okay? This is affective testing. You know what affective testing is? Affective measures emotional behavior. They suggest that what we need to do to help students thrive, to get ahead, we need to we need to create data points out of their emotional behavior. So here's one way we can do it. There we go. See, if we use facial expression cameras and posture analysis seating, so that it's kind of electrodes in, you kind of measure how they're sitting and moving around. A pressure-sensitive mouse that we can actually read whether they're sweating and whether their hands are moving. And then wireless skin conducted sensors, we can have a better look into their psyche and understand their behavior. This is where this is going. Now, they haven't done this yet. This was a study, this is a draft that has not been done yet. But they're serious about it. And did you see the guy I just had on before? Do you think this is just a passing fancy with a fellow like this? This is serious stuff. Now, let me tell you what they measure with this. They measure recognizing bias in sources. Well, who gets to establish which bias is good and which is bad? Who does that? How do you set that up? What is my curriculum going to look like for my child, and what in the world are you teaching her? Adaptability. I want you to look at, there's a pattern here if you watch this. Appreciation of diversity, communication, collaboration, teamwork, cooperation, empathy, perspective taking, trust, service orientation, social influence. I do a lot of behavioral testing. In fact, I design tests that are used in different parts of the world right now. We measure behaviors, we measure the different styles of management styles in corporate executives and so on and so forth. But there's a balance. There's no balance here. You know what's missing? This is all about compliance. Look at those words again. This came right out of their book. This is all about compliance. That's all they're measuring here. There's nothing about drive, ambition, competitiveness, entrepreneurship. It's all missing. There's nothing about persuasiveness. There's nothing about talent and skills and the talent-skills balance and how does my child really move ahead and become something, make something of herself or herself. It's all missing. You're not going to get this. It's not part of the Common Core curriculum. Now, let me clarify something else. That doesn't mean you can't teach it. Okay? The people who support it will say, oh, but there's nothing to stop you from teaching it. How are you going to teach it when 8 hours a day you're focused on meeting the Common Core standards? There's no time left to teach this stuff. Did you know that cursive writing is not required in there? And the child psychologists now tell us, there's a lot of nerve endings here that connect directly to the brain. And when you write, you're actually learning. You're not just writing the words, you're actually learning. It's not just, now you'll never be able to read the Constitution. Yeah, I get it. Okay, that's a problem. But it goes well beyond that. Children are going into the 4th and the 5th grade now, and their motor skills are damaged. And doing this, blah, 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 it doesn't cover it. The learning isn't taking place up here. So all of a sudden their growth is being stunted. But we don't need cursive. But David Coleman says, well, there's nothing to stop you from teaching cursive. Really? There's everything in the world to stop you. Because I want to get my raise as a teacher. I'm a good teacher. I need a raise. I'm not going to get it if I don't meet your standards. These are, I don't know. invisible handcuffs or whatever you want to call it. That's what's around the teachers. This is an expert. Gary Thompson has actually appeared and spoken, given testimony against Common Core. He's a clinical psychologist. And here's what he had to say about what you just looked at, the testing that the government wants to do under this data capture. The level of information provided about a particular child is sensitive and extremely personal in nature. The accuracy of these tests is outstanding. I can tell you that. We do testing like this for chief executive officers for companies. If they're going to hire somebody who's going to be in charge of a lot of cash and things like this, we do testing. These things are spot on accurate. I got to tell you, I can nail somebody just like that, just by a simple test. And that's what these things are doing. You don't need this done to your children. Placed in the right hands of trained mental health professionals, psychological testing can save lives. In the wrong hands, it can ruin lives and create psychological trauma. Professionals in clinical psychology have learned through 100 years of testing, of well-documented testing of abuse in America, to put into place, they've learned to put restraints in place that protect the safety of children. So when you use these tests, you use them with restraints. Last sentence. Common Core testing policies arrogantly ignored each and every one of these. Do you still think Common Core is just a good idea? Well, let's just give it a shot and see if it works. This isn't like new math. It's not going to disappear. It's not going to go away because it's embedded in all the textbooks that your children have in school. Common Core literally transforms society. Who knows what this young man could become when he grows up? He's got the whole world in front of him. He could become anything. He could become an airline pilot. He could become a computer technician. He could become Mr. Mom. I don't know. He could be anything he wants to be. He gets to be anything in the world that he wants to be when he grows up. Except we now have society that's got him in a pen. And they decide what he's going to do. The standards have been established for him. The assessments match those standards and the curriculum matches that. The texts that you buy are put out many by Pearson Publications and by offshoots of Pearson and by McGraw-Hill. They're making not millions, they're into the billions that they're making on all this, on these products. College exams have already been lowered. The standards have been simplified so kids can get into college, and they've already attacked the colleges. And oh, by the way, if you don't realize it, Barack Obama has a program for race to the top for college. He's preparing to roll that out. Part of it was in his last budget. Now, what's missing here? You could argue that, well, the school controls everything, but I got my kid the rest of the day, right? The only bad thing that could happen would be if the school decided, we're going to have your kids all day long. Now, that would be terrible because then you'd have no influence at all. We remember Arnie Duncan? I want you to listen to Arnie. Get this little guy going here.
I think our schools, let me walk through this, is a really, really important point. Let me start with the day first. I think our schools should be open 12, 13, 14 hours a day. So it's not just lengthening.
So 8 to 8 or something like that?
Yes, and let me tell you what, not just lengthening hours of the school day, but a wide variety of after-school activities, drama, arts, sports, chess, debate, academic enrichment, programs for parents, GED, ESL, family literacy nights, potluck dinners. At home we attach healthcare clinics to about 24 of our schools. Where schools truly become the centers of the community, great things happen. So I think we need the schools open much longer hours. And by the way, we don't have to do this all ourselves as educators. You can bring in great nonprofits, the YMCAs, the Boys and Girls Clubs, mentoring and tutoring groups to co-locate their services and better serve the community from the school. In every neighborhood in our country, you have schools. In every school, you have classrooms, you have computer labs, you have libraries, you have gyms, many have pools. Those buildings don't belong to you or I. They don't belong to the unions. They belong to the community. We have these great physical resources, and we need to maximize
So keep them open 12 hours a day, 12 months a year.
Yes.
12 hours a day, 12 months a year.
And I would go to 6 or 7 days a week, not just Monday through Friday.
Should you hear it? 12 hours a day, 67 days a year. That's Arnie Duncan has given a speech to this effect in front of the United Nations already, and Bright, the United States was heading in that direction. More than once, he and Barack Obama have had joint conversations that have been released to the press, in which they said that having more engagement with the children would be a better idea. So this little cage that you see around that young man, if it's up to this fellow, and he's in a position of authority, he's head of the Department of Education, would be a 7-day-a-week evacuation. Now just imagine, what could be drummed into your child? What could they, suppose they wanted just to teach them that Democrats were all bad or Republicans were all bad. Could they do that? Be a piece of cake. There'd be nothing to it. Because we have all the influence and you have virtually none. You wouldn't even see your children. By the time you work a full load of the day and you're commuting, and you sit down, you're so wiped out, you don't even have time to talk. And the kid is just coming in from his YMCA class. And by the way, whoever said, he makes this comment in here, that when students and the community is centered around the school, great things happen. Really? But where do they get that? I've been to some schools in South Philadelphia, and I can tell you, when you build things around a school, not necessarily great things are going to happen. So this stuff is just happening. It's meant to sound good if you don't stop and look at it and analyze it. There's absolutely nothing to support anything this guy said. What you've got is centralized control of your children. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, who's going to be in charge of our kids? Is it going to be me as a dad or you as a mom? Or is it going to be the system with a centralized education here that can indoctrinate them virtually anywhere they want because they want them 6 and 7 days a week? How do you beat this stuff? Let me tell you, it's going to be hard. Because you've got Pearson Publications that's in here, they're making billions off of this. Pearson has already signed deals with the Bill Gates and Microsoft to make more texts. McGraw-Hill, Common Core Solutions, go on their website, all you'll see is Common Core on there. Microsoft, Bill Gates Foundation, the White House, the Department of Education have all gotten together and they have created a monster that to get rid of is going to be like drilling to China. Apple, Google, Microsoft are now selling tablets that are loaded with Common Core software. So is News Corp, by the way. Everybody likes Fox News? News Corp is also getting in on this, the infrastructure part of this. Silicon Valley Journal projects that EdTech business will double by 2017 because of Common Core. The Gates Foundation, I just had to throw this in there, paid $1 million to promote Common Core. They're into the billions that they're spending now to get this thing off the ground, and they stand to make a lot more coming back. The administration, if you want to know where they're going, why does Chris Christie do what he does? Why does Tom Corbett over in Pennsylvania do what he does? I'll tell you why, because they're scared to death. This is called a Blueprint for Reform for 2014 and 2015. I don't know whether you know it, but in Barack Obama's 2014-15 budget, he said that we're going to tie those fiscal funds, the state's fiscal funds, we're going to tie them, Title I funds, we're going to tie them to compliance with Common Core. Now, his budgets are never accepted, thank God, but that doesn't ever stop him. So now he's got this blueprint for reform, and it's going to get through. It wants to rename the Title I program, that's the money that comes for education in your state, the College and Career Ready Standards. And whenever you hear College and Career Ready, what are we talking about? Common Core. There isn't anything else that is College and Career Ready. Tie Title I funds to adoption of Common Core, tie Title I funds to the interoperable database, and tie infrastructure grants to the interoperable database. So if you think you're going to get out of this thing by saying, well, we'll just sever our relationship with those two testing consortium and we don't have to worry, I got a surprise for you. The contracts that some of these subcontractors, these contractors signed with the federal government to build infrastructure in the schools, part of that contract says that they have to pass that money through to them through an interoperable database that acts and talks to your wonderful school. So if you think you're going to get out of this easily, you're not going to get out of this easily. You have been hemmed in 6 ways from Sunday. What you can do about it. I handed out a sheet of paper. Somewhere it's floating around here. But we'll go over these quickly. I'm not sure what time it is. I may run a little over here. Do your own research. Don't take what I'm saying for granted. Do your own research. When you come up against people who are proponents of this, you're going to hear all this tap. Like Jeb Bush had to say, oh, it's wonderful, it's world class, it's about time we had some standards. States are all fragmented in what they're trying to do. You need to opt out of the Common Core testing. I gave you 2 websites that you can go to that shows you exactly what you can do to opt out of testing in your community. Get your kids out of this thing. Form community groups, unless you like it. Now, let me be fair. Maybe you think centralized education is a good way to go. And if you do, okay, then don't do anything. You're okay. But if you don't, and you don't agree with what you're seeing here, then form community groups, tell everybody, neighbors, families, legislators, school officials, distribute flyers. Flyering works. Get a good flyer going, get that thing out, and start hanging it on doorknobs, send them in the grocery store on the bulletin board there, laundromats. Get them out and inform people, because you need masses to stop this thing. Write letters to the editor of your local newspaper. Decide you're going to write 1 letter a week. And then, do tag team. One guy does 1 letter, another guy does another letter. Attend school meetings, Sunday school classes, PTA meetings. Stand up and speak up, learn more, and talk about what you know. Tell your state on a state level, you have to go to the governors and the state legislatures. Tell them you want Common Core repealed. You want them to sever the relationship with the testing consortium. You want them to take down that interoperable database and keep the student data local. If there's data in a database, somebody's going to get it. We haven't figured that one out yet? If it's there, they're going to get it. If you've got a credit card at Target, they're going to get it. If you've got information in a database, the government's going to get it, in spite of what Arnie Duncan disingenuously said. Make plans to manage funding without the federal government. Get used to it, guys. Why do you think in the 70s, when there was the oil embargo, New Mexico or Arizona, I forget which one it was, said, oh, we go 70 miles an hour. We're not lowering our speed to 55 like the president wanted to do. About a week later, they came begging, okay, all right, we'll go 55, no problem. What did they do? What brought the entire sovereign state to their knees? Highway funds. That's what did it. Well, that's what we've done. We're selling our sovereignty now for Title I funds, for money for Race to the Top, for waivers to No Child Left Behind. Get rid of the money. Tell these people we don't want federal money. To your congressional representatives in Washington, D.C., they need to pass legislation forbidding the executive branch to link Title I to Common Core standards. I'd like to say something. To link it to Common Core. Block funding that coerces or incentivizes states to adopt or retain Common Core. And cease sharing data with testing firms. You need some data on children to see how they progress through school. That sort of makes a lot of sense. You want to be able to compare that, and parents need to have access to it. But you want to have access, you want to be able to change the input if it's necessary, you want to be able to discuss these things with the teachers, but you don't want this going to somebody in Washington, D.C. to decide, which way can we get this guy to vote in the next election. What you heard David Coleman talking about, and he was in Silicon Valley talking to a bunch of computer geeks, as he called it. He was talking about politics. What in the world does he have to do with politics? He's supposed to be apolitical because he wants every kid to get across the line, no matter who he voted for in the last election, or will vote for in the next one. Stop Common Core, stop testing, and stop data sharing, or you will be voted out of office. That has to be the message that you give to people. You've got to get serious about this thing. The only thing that politicians, and there's some good politicians. I spent time in Washington, D.C. I met Chuck Grassley. I met some of these other guys down there. We spent some time together, going over to the Reagan building and chatted about strategies and all that kind of nonsense. So, I mean, I get it. And there are some cool people down there. But overwhelmingly, they're not. Overwhelmingly, they're worried about one thing, their seat. That's it. That's the only thing that you can take to the bank that these guys care about, so you've got to threaten it. They have to be more afraid of you than they are of whatever else it is they're worried about. They have to be more worried about you. So let them know you're not going to have a seat. And the only way you can do that, by the way, is if you combine forces. And I mean the left, the right, the middle, the outside skirts, whatever it is. Everybody's got to get together on the same page. If we don't hang together, we'll hang individually. Is that what the guy said? If we don't do this, this is going to go through. This is embedded in concrete right now. So we've got to blast this thing out of there. Another thing you can do is check up on certain websites every day. I put my website on the top, Sustainable Freedom Lab, so you can check that. But there's a lot of really, really good ones out there. TNACC is Tennessee Against Common Core. My very dear friend Karen Bracken runs that. I strongly recommend that website. A lot of data. What is Common Core? .wordpress.com. This is on that sheet of paper I sent out. It's all there. I refuse the Great American Opt-out, and watch Building the Machine. It's a 35-minute video, very beautifully done, very professionally done, that explains a lot of what we're talking about here tonight. Get it? Have a coffee class. Get some friends in your neighborhood to come around and sit down and discuss that. Well, can we bring the lights up and somebody click that little switch over there?